So good morning. Today we're going to be looking at analyzing student work, and I call this student work to die for. DIE stands for describing what you see, interpreting what you see, and evaluating next steps. So two familiar uses that you probably are familiar with in your own work are when teachers get together and analyze student work. It might be in a PLC, it might be in a grade level team. You're trying to build a common understanding what good enough looks like because you're scoring papers. In Vermont, for many years we had the Vermont portfolios, and teachers would get together and score work together so that they could calibrate, they could be consistent in their scoring. That's a pretty typical use of student work analysis. A second use is, once you know how well they did, is then to decide what to do next. Here's something though that I found over the years, that you've got to have a good task. If you don't have a good task, then looking at the student work is kind of a waste of time because you don't get much information. I was doing a workshop yesterday in another state, and we were talking about when you give a pre-assessment that is so complex that no student knows anything, it's not really useful to look at that work because you've wasted the kids' time, you've wasted your time, and then you're not really sure where to begin. So that's a problem. And the other is, if the process isn't efficient, you're not going to use it. And I've seen a lot of good protocols that take a long time to use. So hopefully this will be a process that goes quickly enough for an individual teacher or a group of teachers to be able to look at work, make some decisions. So I like to say, if you're going to take the time to analyze the work, this example is from a geometry quiz, okay? Determining the coordinates of the midpoint, finding the distance, drawing 4 points. If you're going to analyze what kids do, you should take the time to look at assessments that elicit more than just the basic routine stuff. We've all taken geometry, we've all done those tasks. They don't get at deeper thinking. But what we really want to see is, for example, in a science investigation, can they actually use their data to support their conclusions? Or in a writing assignment, can they actually formulate an opinion and support it using evidence? Those are the kind of tasks I call strategically designed tasks. They actually elicit something more than the obvious basic skills. So what is a strategically designed performance task? It's usually got multiple steps to it. That's why we're looking at performance tasks today. It requires integrating the skills into a problem-solving situation. They could be short, within a lesson, a probing question. They could be oral, they could be written. They could take one class period or multiple class periods, like a project. So they could be any size, any form. You should be able to use the student work analysis for any of those. But bottom line is, these are tasks that are going to uncover thinking. So for example, this is a pre-KK task where students were asked the question, if you saw the turtle dove and her baby, how many feet did you see? So the scribing by the teacher, you see the picture there, I made turtle dove and her baby. They have 1, 2, 1, 2 feet. Then you put them together. You get 1, 2, 3, 4 feet. I got 2 feet, but mine are bigger, and I wear sneakers. 2 feet is a pair of feet. So think about the thinking that task uncovered. What are some things you see just in the scribing in terms of skills or concepts or reasoning? Just what do you see in that one?
I see that they counted each of the feet individually and then counted all of them.
Right. So they have a concept of how to count, but also what they need to do with that counting. 1, 2, 1, 2, then that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So they understood they had to combine. They're starting to understand joining together. What else do you see in that student response?
I see that that particular student made a connection with the task itself, so they brought some of their background knowledge.
Right. I've got 2 feet. Mine are bigger. Concepts of larger, smaller. So you see some other math concepts. 2 feet is a pair, another connection. The test didn't ask for that, but if we get kids to think and make those connections, we start to see that. Anything else?
The drawing, they labeled, they drew the feet, so
And
it's
then-
the concrete.
Right. There's a concrete diagram that represents the problem, and it's also labeled using numbers, which were probably copied off of a board or a number line, but the fact that the student can actually copy those numbers and represent the counting. So there's a lot we can see in a piece of student work, and this just reinforces the idea that when they're young, we have to scribe. We have to ask them, tell me how you know, because there's so much more in this part of the scribing than there is in just the actual work. And we'll look at one example in a couple of minutes like that. A high school piece, the students are actually going to be writing their thinking, putting their thinking, making it visible. So this was a task where they had to find where the treasure was buried. And you can see there's a lot of math calculations, but there's also annotation on this about problem solving, about how they communicate their information, how they represent it, how they solved and used concepts, and so on. So that's what we want to see in good student work. We want to see aspects. In math, here's the things I always look for. Did they have a strategy that worked? Were they able to do the calculations needed? Could they figure out what they had to do, what operations they had to use? Did they represent it in a way that really represents the problem? And is there any thinking uncovered? Did they tell you, or did they say something or write something that tells you they're thinking? In ELA, you're looking for something like, did they frame their ideas? Did they support it with evidence? Did they have a beginning, middle, end? Even in a scribed piece of work, you can probe with questions to find out what happened in the beginning, then what happened, how did it end? So you can get at that through oral or written.